Are you ready for the most extreme, hardcore, informative, and slowly produced PhotoScan series on the internet? Fudge yeah! In this installment of our PhotoScan series, we'll be discussing tips and tricks for the scanning of exterior man-made environments. I'm back, and noticeably fatter. It's been a long time since my last video, but I hope the content in this one will make it worth the wait. We have a lot to cover, but first it's time for another user showcase. This is the work of Romain Ruffet, and these are the first scans I saw from him. City streets in Bordeaux, France, which he shot by himself. I was immediately impressed at seeing so much detail from subjects so large, scanned by a single person using photogrammetry. Since then, he's scanned not only buildings, but also fountains, fauna, bombs, motorcycles, and much more. Romain is a scanning machine. If scanning was a sport, he would take home the gold, and probably be tested for performance-enhancing drugs. You can find more of Romain's work on his ArtStation and Sketchfab pages. Now that we've seen what can be done, let's learn how to do it ourselves. If you've seen the previous videos, you know the basics. It's better to shoot under cloudy weather, avoid reflections, use protection. But often we don't have the luxury of perfect conditions. If we need to scan this building, then we need to be able to work around those problems. Problem 1. Dealing with solid colors and patterns. How do we scan a surface that is pretty much a solid color, or a repeating pattern? The simplest option to overcome either of these two problems is to move the camera closer, or use a longer lens. While a building may look like one solid color from a distance, up close it's probably got something you can use to help capture better data. Take clean stucco, for example. Not really much color variation here, and no dirt or grime to help either, so you're going to have a tough time getting points. But the surface isn't smooth, it's rough and irregular. It's a bit of that randomness we need. If you shoot closely enough, PhotoScan can pick up on the natural ambient occlusion of the surface. And if that's not enough, you could shoot the wall in sunlight for more pronounced shadows. It doesn't matter that shadows are being captured because the wall is basically just one color anyway, so it's easy to fix in post. What if you have a repeating pattern, like brick? Old, worn, and dirty bricks are easy to scan, but clean, fresh bricks can be harder. From a distance, they'll all look very much identical, but this is where resolution comes in play again. Up close, those bricks probably are different from one another, and as soon as PhotoScan can spot those differences, it can figure out what it's looking at. If they aren't different from one another, you're screwed, at least until the next video comes out. If you're shooting big subjects and you find you're having to shoot way too many pictures to get a clean scan, it might be worth looking into a high megapixel camera. When coupled with a sharp lens, a higher resolution sensor will reduce how close you have to be when shooting these tricky surfaces, or any surface really, because they can capture so much more data. To compare resolution, this is the size of an HD video. This is the size my own camera shoots at. And this is the size of a 50 megapixel sensor. Oh yeah! The extra resolution is substantial, but just be aware of how many pictures you're shooting. The extra RAM required to process all those pixels can bring your computer to its knees, much like your mother. My friend Sebastian Zapata shoots with a Canon 5D a 50 megapixel camera, and sometimes uses all of his available 128 gigs of RAM during processing. By the way, Sebastian has been creating a lovely collection of scan textures for his website, friendlyshade.com, which is set to go live later this year. He's even asked me to contribute a selection of scans to his ever-growing library. If you're looking for high-quality textures, You'd be hard-pressed to find anything better. Problem 2. Shiny or reflective surfaces. Odds are, you're going to be dealing with glossy or reflective surfaces every time you scan man-made stuff. Windows, railings, roads, tires, trash bins, tushies. Reflections are always going to be there, but there are ways to deal with them. Polarizing filters. If you're interested in photography, you probably already know about these. They can be used to remove reflections from objects. They won't do anything crazy like turn a mirror black, but they will reduce many highlights and other reflections. They work best when light is only coming from one direction, and they won't be able to remove every reflection in every shot, but they're still an invaluable tool and can save you a lot of time and frustration with some subjects. If you decide to get one, do yourself a favor and don't skimp when shopping for it. This is a case where you get what you pay for, and the cheap ones are usually junk. Personally, I went with Hoya HD filters for my lenses. But don't fret, if you can't use a polarizing filter on your shoot, there is another way to cut down on reflections. Just shoot everything head on. As the saying goes, everything has Fresnel, so if you avoid shooting at glancing angles, you should be alright. This is also the best strategy to get good texture map details, so you really ought to be shooting head on for the most part anyway. Problem 3. This thing is big. Where do I even start? Let's say you're scanning a building or a big environment, and it seems like a lot to handle, maybe even daunting to think about everything you have to capture. Before you shoot these big subjects, I recommend taking the time to plan your shoot. Get some pictures of the place and break it down into smaller pieces. If you can, why not shoot a quick test scan of the area with a small number of photos? This will help you identify where the problem areas are and how to resolve them. If you have enough experience already, you can even decide specific shooting patterns for each area, and estimate how many photos you will need to capture on the day of the real shoot. By the way, if you're scanning something that is pretty much flat, you don't need to shoot 1,000 pictures from every angle. Flat, or planar, subjects are the easiest things to scan. Just point the camera straight at the surface and snap your shots. You don't need to shoot sideways or at any kind of angle unless you have some geometry that is hard to see from this view. This works for tons of things. Walls, rocky ground, carvings. It's a simple and convenient way to shoot. 2 factors which make it easy to get sharp pictures. Planar shooting is great. Of course, planar scanning doesn't work with everything. Like I said, if you have areas that are more complex in your environment, you'll want to go back to those for further shooting to make sure you've captured them properly. But by breaking down the environment into smaller areas and planning how you want to shoot ahead of time, you're less likely to become overwhelmed, less likely to overshoot, and more likely to get the whole project done faster and with better fidelity. To reduce time even further, 2 or more people can be shooting at once. Problem 4. This thing is huge! Scanning something really big can be like trying to photograph the main course in the middle of a crowded dinner table. This is the best analogy I could come up with. It's hard to fill the frame with the subject, and you often can't shoot from every angle you'd like to, unless you have a drone. Scanning with a drone will probably yield not only the best result, it's also likely to be the most practical method. Robert Krachek used a DJI Phantom 4 Pro to shoot this coal mine. More than 1,600 images were shot over a period of 6 to 8 hours. You can see that the drone enabled him to capture almost every visible surface, whereas if he'd been shooting from the ground, many areas would have been lost due to occlusion. A good drone can be expensive, which is why I don't have one, But if you can buy or borrow a drone, it may be exactly what your project needs. Just don't fly it anywhere you shouldn't. Now, since I don't have a drone, we'll be focusing on the drone alternative, long lenses. How long the lens should be depends how far away you're going to be from the subject, but I would recommend at least 100mm as a minimum. I also recommend shooting with a prime lens, aka not a zoom lens, because a prime lens is going to produce sharper images and sharpness is paramount here. But you can get by with a zoom if that's your only option. In fact, I'm using a 75 to 300mm zoom. You're also going to want to use a tripod for sure, and any other tricks I've covered in the past for increasing sharpness. Side note, high-quality telephoto lenses are expensive. If you can't afford to buy or rent one, there are cheap alternatives out there that look suspiciously all the same. I've never used one myself, but if it's the only option you can afford, it might just do the job. Just be cautious and read reviews, because if the price seems too good to be true, it probably is. A brief note on lighting for big subjects. Ideally, you want the lighting to be relatively consistent, because it may take you a while to shoot this thing, and you don't want to have to start over because the sky changed. However, the type of light you'll want to scan in will depend on your subject. We often think of cloudy skies and diffuse lighting as the best condition to scan, but that's not always true. If you were scanning these types of structures, then diffuse lighting would be preferred, since the surface already has a lot of textural information that will be easy for PhotoScan to identify points on. Shooting in direct light would just make it harder to separate the shadows from the color map. Additionally, if your subject has a lot of reflective pieces, diffuse lighting is going to help minimize reflections and glare in your images. But if you're shooting this building, then I say hard direct light is the way to go. The surface of the building contains very little color variation, and much like shooting a stucco wall, we're relying on the surface detail of the walls to get useful points, so we want them to stand out as much as possible. Building upon this idea, remember this. Your results may depend on what time of day you scan. Take this train bridge, for example. Its surface is very dark, so it needs a lot of light to get good data. From up here on a neighboring bridge, this is what I see at 8 a.m., 1 p.m., and 5 p.m. Clearly, 8 a.m. is going to give me much better data for the bridge from this position. If you have a tricky subject like this, you might intentionally shoot different sides at different times of day, when each side has its best lighting. For complex structures, it's likely that some part of the scan will be obscured from the camera no matter what you do, but if you have an overall solid base to work from, it will make cleaning up the scan and post that much easier.
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it.
I am enjoying this scene.
Get on with it.
Let's say I want to scan this cement factory. It's surrounded by a fence, so I can't get close to any part of it. And to avoid reflections on all the various metal pieces, I've decided to scan it under cloudy weather. Once you decide what kind of lighting to shoot your own subject under, you just need to figure out what locations to shoot from. You'll start from the first area, capturing the whole thing, then move on to the next area, and the next, and so on. The long lens will hopefully be long enough to give you a close-up view of the subject, so that you'll be able to take at least 3 or 4 rows or columns of pictures to cover the whole thing. Aim for around 30 to 50% overlap between images. I would also advise you to shoot a full subject set of images to ensure better alignment when processing in PhotoScan. If you only shoot close-ups, your scan is more susceptible to becoming warped or distorted. This is a good habit to practice for any subject, not just the big ones. Now I know what you're thinking. James, that match looks like shit. Please, I know. I couldn't find anything better in my area to shoot for this segment. But I decided I could talk about what you could do if your own scan looks like this, and how to improve the results. You'll notice we have many thin and intricate pieces of geometry, such as the ladders and the handrails. These types of details aren't easy for PhotoScan to reconstruct, so the bigger they can appear in the photos, the better they'll turn out. This means using a longer lens and/or a higher resolution camera. If we were able to shoot at various heights, this would also help improve the accuracy of the reconstruction. You could stand on a car, on a ladder, perhaps even on top of a neighboring building. Anything to add more parallax to the images, instead of just shooting them all from the ground. You can see that the higher up you look on the scan, the noisier and less detailed it becomes. But in my opinion, the single factor that would improve the scan the most would be more coverage. Like I said, I was only able to shoot images around part of the factory. The sides of the mesh that faced where I was standing looked pretty good. You can clearly see detail in those areas. But as you move away from those areas, the scan becomes hot garbage. If we were to shoot a complete 360-degree arc around the subject, without using a better lens, a higher resolution camera, or even shooting at multiple elevations, I think the clarity of the scan would be substantially increased, to a level comparable with the best parts we currently see here, simply due to having shot more coverage. Problem 5. Textures? If you don't need super accurate textures, you can just eyeball the colors when you're editing. But if accuracy is important, or you're working with PBR, it can be very helpful to get a color chart. It's also great if you're shooting with different lenses or cameras and need to match different looks. I use a bigger style chart, but you can also find smaller versions that are easier to carry around. There are various ways you can use the data the color chart provides. I like using 3D LUT Creator and its handy tools to create a profile for my images, but you can use whatever you prefer. DLighting. DLighting is an essential part of the scanning process if you intend to relight your model in a game or render engine. If you don't need a super accurate color map, you can just reduce highlights and boost shadows to approximate the look of a DLiT map. If you want a more accurately DLiT color map, there are a few more options. DLighting is a subject that could fill its own video, so I'm just going to point to some links for you to explore on your own. Unreal Engine has a good introduction explaining the basics of how they DLiT textures for their kite demo here. Robert Berg discusses how he used the DLighting nodes in Substance Designer in his forest project here. Dmitry Kremiansky, is that right? Shares his method of DLighting in Maya, but the same technique can be replicated in just about any major CG application. And David Miranda demonstrates a slightly different technique using ambient occlusion in his blog here. And one more link, this just barely made it into the video at the last minute. Apparently Unity has an experimental DLighting feature they're working on. It looks really easy to use and seems to give pretty damn good results. I think we're going to start seeing DLighting solutions becoming integrated into more and more software in the near future. Here's a link to the full video. PhotoScan also exports 16 and 32-bit images, so you can generate HDR textures for your scenes if that's your thing. If you're looking to reproduce the exact look of your environment in CG, this can be a good method, since it's like slapping an environment map on your geometry. Bonus chapter, reality capture. Now I know it might be taboo to mention reality capture in a PhotoScan video, but damn it, you should know your options. I think it's worth mentioning reality capture in this video because of something I mentioned previously. PhotoScan, so far, isn't very good at capturing complex, intricate geometry, which is something you'll find a lot of once you start scanning environments, as opposed to just scanning individual objects. But reality capture, on the other hand, is pretty good at capturing complex geometry. I've seen some amazingly detailed scans processed using reality capture that would have been immensely harder to do in PhotoScan. Reality capture is also really fast too, which means you can process those giant image sets, like your scan of the entire city of Rotterdam, in less time. Now there are many other factors involved, so whether you choose to use reality capture or PhotoScan or any other program simply depends on your personal preferences and project requirements. But it's worth checking out if you haven't already. And don't worry, PhotoScan, I'll never leave you. I'll have both. That's it for this video. You can find all the scans shown here available to view and download on my Sketchfab page, and high-resolution renders on my ArtStation page. All the scans shown in this video were rendered with HDRIs by Greg Zoll of HDRIhaven.com and Philip Modine of HDRVault.com. They've both made all their HDRIs available for free for download, so if you ever need some good image-based lights, I recommend checking them out. Especially Greg, his stuff is great. No offense, Philip, yours is good too. And before I go, I want you to pick the subject of the next scanning video. Would you rather I focus on scanning interior environments, or a bunch of different camera rigs for scanning? Let me know in the comments below, along with any other questions you may have. I'm more than happy to answer them to the best of my ability. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. It's hot in this. I've got the weirdest boner right now.